Hey everyone, and welcome to Read This Now, the weekly webcast where Brad Gustafson and I share two books that we love and we think you should read when, Brad?
Right now, or as soon as we're done recording, at least.
I love it when you do your dances around that. That always gets me real excited when you start doing interpretive dance around my
Yeah, I felt
introduction.
like I had the this one mastered, so I want to,
Yes.
I had to switch it up. We're always
Always
improving.
challenging. Yes, always challenging yourself. So, what have you been reading this week, my friend?
Oh my goodness, the book that I have read had led realization. I have failed my kids at home because I was recommending a sequel that
Oh
is
dear.
so good, and my middle child was like, well, Dad, I haven't even read the first one yet. I'm like, well, who is organizing your reading life, and how was that not at the top, and what have I done as a dad to let that happen? So she confirmed with me yesterday. She's like, Dad, I'm going to read Front Desk next, and then I'll be able to slide in the sequel.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, this one I think is coming out this fall, and it is, let me just say, Jen, speaking from the heart as succinctly as possible, it reminded me vividly of what it's like to be in love with reading and think about it when you're not doing it, and probably be reading a book when you should be socializing with friends, or maybe not reading a book. It has a gravitational pull, and it was just a good reminder for me as a dad and a principal that when people aren't in that space, it's easy to understand why they're not thinking about and being super passionate about. So let's find them the right books. Let's get to know them and help connect them to the books that they are longing for, because when you have that book, or a book like this that you should read right now, or read this now, sorry, it's a game changer. There's nothing like it. There's no substitute for a book that you are deeply in love with and don't want to put down and stop reading. So I do want to take a slightly different approach on this book and just say, this is a really interesting one. In addition to loving it, Mia is working at her family's hotel, which she owns. They're immigrants, and it details kind of real examples of, and the author, Kelly Yang, in the very back talks about some of the examples of prejudice, racism, things like that are real. So this is a fiction book, but some of the things that are cited in here actually happen to people. But here's the thing that I was thinking about as an educator. This is good. The conversations a class could have about this are good. But here's the part, and I overanalyze things. You know this about me, and sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's not. I was thinking about, there will, I think, be some parents who might think that about any book, maybe this book too, that they're political in nature, or pushing an agenda. And to that, my heart mourns, knowing that probably will happen. So I think we need to read these books and understand them, and be ready to empower kids to ask questions and have dialogue, and not tell them what to think or how to think, but to at least talk about, there's more than one view in this world, and there's more than one experience. And if we never talk about that because someone says it's political, then I think we're sorely missing the mark. I think our kids deserve to learn to be taught to talk about things that actually have real life connotations. So that's kind of in addition to loving this book and falling in love with it, my mind did go to that instructor space and principal space, who sometimes fields calls like that. I can see this book being a catalyst to real conversations that matter. And I think that's just another reason we actually should read this now.
Well, Brad, I often, when I talk to educators about reading and sharing their reading lives, one of the things I find myself saying all the time is that you might be the only adult in that child's life who shares a positive reading life, who waves that flag of reading is awesome, because not every kid has ever has a teacher who has a reading life that they share. Not every kid has a home where books and reading are valued. You might be the only one, whoever you are, you might be the only one to be waving a flag that says reading is awesome. And in that same vein, you might be the only person who is planting a flag that says it's safe for us to talk about these issues. It's important for us to talk about these issues. Or planting the flag that says the world doesn't look for everyone the way it looks for you. And it's important for us to look at the world from different vantage points. So I think every educator has to take that responsibility seriously. We hope that all teachers are sharing their reading lives. We all hope that all teachers are helping their kids see the world from multiple vantage points, but we can't assume that that's happening for every kid. You might be the only one. And so I feel like educators have to approach those topics as though they are the sole voice doing that for kids, because kids are looking to us to lead. They're looking to us to show them what it's like to live in a world where not everybody is treated the same way. They're looking for us for guidance and resources to help them make the world better. And of course, you and I believe strongly that books are a huge part of that.
Right,
So
right. And
I
it
I love
occurs
it.
to me too, Jen, based on hearing what you said, like we want to have kids come to school not just for answers and to be told
Hmm.
what to think and what to say and how to act, but like to learn to ask better questions and to learn to
Yes.
listen and empathize and study and question and push back and all those things. And I think reading a wide array of books can help us do that. I do, in like just really quick because you kind of spurred this. As a second grade teacher, that's what I taught before I became a principal. I don't think I was in love with reading per se. So all those kiddos I served, although I was in love with other things and tried to connect with them in different ways, they didn't necessarily have a second grade teacher who carried that banner. So this is like a thank you to the teachers who continue to carry the banner, because it's contagious and people might not
Hmm.
catch it right away, but the more you talk about books and share your genuine passion, the more people like me who it just takes a little longer, like we're listening, we're paying attention. And it just took a lot of people kind of book whispering into my life for many
Hmm.
years, and now I've caught the bug, Jen. So anyway, that was more than a book talk. That was like half memoir, half book talk.
No, I think these conversations are so incredibly important. Listen, Brad, I was an English language arts teacher for a decade before I became a librarian. And I often think back on those years and how I would do it differently. And as we all do, because the more we know, the better we would be. Like if I could go back to the classroom with everything I know now, I'd be a much better teacher than I was 10 years ago, right? Or I'm sorry, 20 years ago. That's how old I am. But one of the things I would absolutely change is my emphasis on reading as joyful versus reading as important. As a teacher, I focused greatly on the importance of reading because, reading was a skill you needed for college. Reading was going to help you pass the test. Reading was going to it was important. But I didn't focus on reading as being essential to who you are as a human. I focused on reading as being essential to who you are as a student. And I think a lot of kids have that voice in their ear all the time about why reading is important to you as a student. But most of our kids' identities are not wrapped around being a student. Our kids'
Yep.
identities are wrapped around other things that have to do with being a human being. And so if we can share with them passionately and authentically about how reading is important to being a human, I think we're far more likely to capture them as readers, and that will affect everything they do as a student. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. I just know as a classroom teacher, I think I put the emphasis on in the wrong place. And so if I could go back and do it again, I would do it differently. Of course, we can't. All we can do is do it differently now, right? So I think
Right.
that's part of what we're trying to do with this show, even.
And what you said, even the importance of being human, if I'm being fully honest, that is not always a draw. I mean, that you
Mhm.
like for me, your analogy or your story was so good because the books that I know are important, they help me learn. You know, I am interested in reading, but sometimes I have to talk myself into getting there. Like,
Yeah.
I got to pick that up. I got to keep plugging, or I'm naturally motivated. Like, I want to learn how to do this. But the books that I'm reading for the joy, like this book, like almost it gets to the point sometimes probably where my family has to hide the books so that they can hang out with me. You know what I mean? That's the difference. So that's why, like, keeping the joy on the radar as an educator is probably just as important as the important human developed thing. And when we can do both and have them both linked, like, look out world.
Right. Well, I would say I think that those things are linked, you know, like the joyful aspect of reading is the part that feeds us as human beings. Maybe not in like this deep, profound, poetic way, but just in terms of making us happier, of, you know, feeling fulfilled, you know, like all of that's an important part of being human. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, well, you know, it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about the book that I read that I wanted to talk about this week. And this, like your book, this is a book that I couldn't put down, that I found myself like ignoring the rest of the outside world because I had to be reading this book. But I can't imagine anyone who would read this book and describe it as joyful. Because there's not a lot of happiness in the book that I'm about to share. The other thing I was going to mention is that I love how, you know, Brad and I have had sort of this unspoken rule. We talked about it a couple of times, but not to a great extent, about how we try not to share books that haven't been published already. Because so often, you know, teachers our three viewers will get real excited about this book and they can't get it right then, right? And yet both Brad and I this week are sharing books that aren't published. So look, again, Brad, it's like we have
Thank
these
you. You saved me.
unspoken.
I was feeling a little guilty for doing it. So thank you.
Well, I held off because I wanted to share this book 2 weeks ago when I first read it, and I kept saying, no, I've got to wait. But now I've decided I'm not waiting any longer, because in my view, I also want those folks who are in a position to be pre-ordering books to go ahead and do it, to get it on the pre-order list, because this book is going to be incredible. So I want to share with you the book Grown, by Tiffany D. Jackson. Look at this gorgeous cover. I mean, it's just so beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have read any of Tiffany D. Jackson's other books, then number one, you'll have a high bar set for this one, because her other books, like Allegedly, which is one of my favorite books of all time, period, Allegedly, and then Monday's Not Coming, which won the Schneider Family Book Award last year. Those books are so unique in their voice, but also powerful in their story. Then you probably have a high expectations for her latest one, Grown. And I'm going to tell you what, she is going to knock those expectations out of the park again. I don't know how she does it. This is the story of a high school student named Enchanted Jones. And in the first 2 pages, this is what happens, Brad. We meet Enchanted, who wakes up in a hotel room. She doesn't know how she's gotten there. She's covered in blood, and she looks over, and on the bed is slumped over a famous R&B musician who is dead. We have no idea how she got there. We have no idea what's happened. We have no idea, like, and neither does Enchanted. And in Tiffany D. Jackson's style, in her typical style, we don't learn the answer until 347 pages later.
That's amazing.
I mean, she has this way of crafting these mysteries in the beginning and then not revealing the truth, which usually is a total kick to the gut and surprise at the very, very end. And she keeps you guessing throughout. But what's really remarkable about her books is that you've got that whole mystery aspect of this teenage girl embroiled in this terrible murder and what has happened. But what we learn in those 350 pages in between is what is unpacked is this story of how Oftentimes, when young girls are taken advantage of by older people, older men, their stories aren't believed. And how, in particular, Black girls are almost seen as disposable when they are exploited, taken from their families, and abused. The same kinds of resources that are brought to bear when that same situation happens for a white girl is very different when the girl is poor and Black. And so it's this story is really about the unique struggles that Black girls face in the world. And it's wrapped up in this mystery that absolutely keeps you turning the pages every single page. You just don't want to put the book down to see what's happening or what will happen. I heard Tiffany talk about her books once, and she said that she felt like her book should come with a trigger warning that you need some self-care when you read her books. And despite the graphic nature of what I described in this first scene, really and truly much of the tough stuff in this book is implied and not graphically described. So, you know, I personally knew many eighth graders who would be able to read this book, but I also know many adults who would feel triggered and upset by some of the content, even though it's not graphically described. So it's one of those books that you're going to need to practice some self-care when you read it, because it is tough stuff. The last thing I will say, though, is that I feel like Tiffany D. Jackson's voice is so incredibly unique among literature for young people, because it feels like, and I don't know her, so I this is just my interpretation, but from all the books she's written, it feels like she's taken up this mantle to speak for Black girls who have not just been forgotten, but sort of looked at as disposable. Poor Black girls who are abandoned by the very people and structures who should be protecting them and helping them grow up into strong Black women. So despite the dark nature of this book, oh my gosh, I loved it so much, Brad. I can't quit thinking about it. And one more thing that I'll mention, I mentioned at the beginning that there's a murder involving a famous R&B singer in this book. And one of the things that was really joyful is that throughout the book is all this great music that is mentioned. And so I made myself a Spotify playlist with all the songs that are mentioned in the book, so that way I could listen to this great music after the fact. So it's Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, and I don't think it's out until September, but if you teach high school, or even if you work with like eighth grade, like upper middle school, I think that you should put this on your pre-order list, or even if you just want to read it yourself, because it is awesome.
That's fantastic. I have lots of books I need to read and want to read and are ready for me to read, but Wink, if you remember a month or two ago, you talked that one mentally needs to be there. And then this one, those are two that I need to put right near the top. So let me ask, was Casey and JoJo, the R&B band, were they mentioned at all in that book? Because that would put it right at the top.
No,
yes.
no.
Okay.
But I'll have to link you to my playlist so you can see the ones that are. If I could, I can't think of two books that are so totally opposite than Wink and Grown. So it'll be very interesting to hear you talk about them if you're able to prioritize.
Yeah, that has more to do with your persuasion of great book talks. You've got me interested in both those. So.
Well, I loved it, and I love talking about books with you. Look how I'm transitioning here like a pro.
You are good. Jen, let's be honest, you're the only thing that keeps this show going, or at least watchable.
at all. I think we'd lose at least one of our 3 viewers if I was just sitting here talking to myself, right? So it
That's
takes
great.
2, my friend. It takes 2. That being said, if folks do love our crazy banter and our chat about books every week, where can they go to see our book list and to watch our archive of videos?
Definitely bit.ly/, I think it's this way, read underscore, these hand signals are not working for me,
I like it.
_this_now.
Woo! Great job,
Yeah, and I
y'all.
don't know if I said my title, but it was 3 Keys by Kelly Yang. I think I was just so excited I just talked about the book. So there you have it.
That one's on my shelf, and I'm excited to read it even more so now that you've endorsed it. So that's
Nice.
great.
There's something that Mia is eating. Well, there's lots of meal stories in here, but one of the things she was eating, I scrounged at home and ate it because, you want to connect with the characters in the book a little
Yes.
bit. So there you have it.
I love it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and we will see you next week on Read This Now.